We're gonna get started with the QTO process. To do that in Civil 3D, you will need three file types: a pay item file that is a .csv, a categorization file, which is a .xml, and a formula file, which is a .for. We are going to ignore the categorization file. It's not actually necessary. I'll show you what it does though. So quantity takeoff, you guys probably covered this in class, but quantity takeoff is simply the process of looking at your plans and your models and taking off quantities or materials that are necessary for the project. So that's what our cost estimation template here is looking at all of our material quantities, and you can see that these come in different units, right? Some of them you count, some of them are by square footage, some of them are by cubic yards, linear feet. Now, technically, this maybe isn't totally accurate. For example, you might buy concrete by weight. That's probably more common and instead of cubic yards, but we'll keep it simple and use cubic yards. It just makes some of the formulas a little less complicated, so we'll roll with this. So the first thing we need to do is make our pay item file. Now, Civil 3D comes stock with both a pay item file and a categorization file, actually, which contains a bunch of materials, a bunch of groups, but it doesn't contain everything that we need. And quite frankly, it contains a bunch of stuff we don't. So I thought this would be a good process for you guys to go through, both making your own and also not having to deal with a bunch of extra materials and taking your time to look through a bunch of lists. So at this point, you should open a new Excel file. I already have one started here. It's called pay item list, and you need three columns in that file: pay item, item description, and unit. And yours should look like mine in terms of spacing and in terms of layout. Don't fill anything in column D onwards. It should all be in A, B, and C. And we'll just add onto the list going down. So this should look fairly familiar to you with item descriptions and units. So you need to put any items on here that you need quantities from Civil 3D. So going back to that cost estimation template, something like the roof steel or the cement, or in my case, the cement we're going to get from problem 7. It's that concrete slab, and I think it was a 1-inch finish, and I know the area, so I can find its volume. Roof steel, same thing. The cut and the fill, Civil 3D already gave to us, so I don't need to do extra, QTO for it or anything. So any item you need from Civil 3D, you should put in your pay item list. You should have, at a minimum, of 5 items on this list that you are going to find quantities for, and you need at least one of each of the main units, being volume, area, and counting like a light pole each. So you need at least one of each, one that is an area like square foot, and at least one that is a volume like cubic yard. You should have also, again, at least 5 items. You're more than welcome to do more, but you should have at least 5 items here. So the item description is pretty self-explanatory. The item descriptions are pretty self-explanatory here. Those mostly come from the template or whatever you want to call it. The units, however, there's standard nomenclature that Civil 3D recognizes. I can show you some of those here, highlighted on my cursor. This is, by the way, a sneak peek on all the work I had to do to make your project. So you can see you can do each, you can do linear foot, yards, acres, square footage, square yards, cubic feet, cubic yards, pounds, and tons. There are other units in there, but these are the ones that are most common and applicable to your guys' project. So that's where the units come from. I would use these abbreviations exactly. If they're uppercase, they're all uppercase, and I would keep them as all uppercase. The other thing you can fill in is the pay item, which is the item code. This item code follows this format, which looks like a bunch of X's, but it should be a string of 5 numbers and a string of 3 numbers. In reality, this is really a string of 2 numbers, a string of 3 numbers, and another string of 3 numbers. Those codes represent a division, a section, and a subsection. And you might be asking a division, section, and subsection of what? Well, this will be linked on the assignment deliverable under resources of your document. But this is an example of what those codes are. So CSI codes are licensed from the Construction Specifications Institute. And this is a way of creating standard terminology for people to reference certain materials and certain parts of the building. So you can see here all of the upper divisions. The divisions are those left two numbers, right? So there's 48 divisions, or give or take. You can see that they skip like 47, for example. Don't ask me all of the reasoning behind this. I don't know why they go from 14 to 21. Really, I have no idea. But these are pretty standard. So like your 5s are always your metals, your 6s are your woods, 12s are your furnishing, fire suppression is 21. So these are what we're going to use to make those codes. And if you expand any of these, for example, metals, and you click on it, now you get all of the sections and the subcode and the subsections. Sorry. So for example, we have, let's look for some structural steel. So structural steel, you can see different subcodes for structural steel. So we would be using, for example, structural steel for buildings. So if we needed that from Civil 3D, which we don't, my code would be 05, 012, and then 023 or 230. Honestly, the subcode is more up to you. So looking back at these pay item codes, the first two numbers are the division. You should get those to be accurate. So look to see where you can find the item you're looking for and write down those two numbers first. Then if you can find a section or a subsection, that's great. If not, just make up the numbers. It really doesn't matter for the purposes of this project. Just make sure that you're doing it in this format where it's 5 numbers dash 3 numbers. So you have permission to make up all the numbers except for the first two, right? Those should be accurate. So let's go through the process of adding one of these. For example, I am going to look at, let's see if we can find something about tables. We might not be able to because that's not like construction material, but we will certainly look. So table accessories are here. Office accessories. Boots and tables. Here we go. So I might use this code, for example. So I will go to my pay item list. I'll type in 12. I think it was 64. Yep. 12. And then I'll type in 640, but you could type in 064. It really, again, does not matter. Tables each. And so that's what putting in a pay item might look like. So just look around. Sometimes they're in a little bit of like weird places that you might not totally ever think of. So like earthwork is where you would find a lot of your, landscaping and your excavation, your fill, your grading, all of that is here. Utilities, you can see what that comes into. So if you're adding any culverts or any manholes or anything like that, that's where these would come from. Same with lights, I think. So just look around at these. Again, they don't have to be perfect, but just pick the division that makes the most sense. Once you've made your list, again, it has to be at least 5 items that you're going to be using, and at least one that is each, one that is an area, and one that is a volume. You need to save this not as an Excel file, but as a .csv file. So if you go to File, Save As, and then save as a comma delimited file, CSV. Again, make sure you have nothing extra, otherwise it's going to read your CSV incorrectly. And we're going to open that in Civil 3D. Just a quick note, if you save it as a CSV and you try to bring it into Civil 3D, which we'll do in the next video, and it doesn't open, chances are there's just some kind of residual Excel data on your file, like some kind of bolded text or formatting or something that is messing it up. If that's the case, open your pay item list in Notepad. Everyone should be on a Windows machine, so everyone should have access to Notepad. If you just open it in Notepad and in Notepad resave it as a CSV, that will get rid of any of the residual data, and then it should work. All right, the next video we will actually do the QTO.